you're not just going to get it off of one post. How many times has their followers seen the product? How high value is the product? Are you targeting the right demo? So it's a lot of test and learn and patience.
You're listening to Stories from the Top, an inside guide to better business development. We are back with Lauren Roth, who is a influencer marketing specialist based out of NYC. Lauren, thanks again for coming on the show. For those who don't know who you are, can you just quickly explain your background real quick?
Yeah, so I am a influencer marketing and community engagement specialist. I focus in consumer brands, particularly been focused in startups and really helping them build their community through influencer and social engagement.
Cool. And can you give us a real quick intro to influencer marketing, just in general, what it is and how it works?
That's a broad question, I guess. Influencer marketing, I guess I would say, well, you're utilizing an influencer's audience to gain, awareness for a brand and conversions. And that's by the influencer talking about your product through their channels. And it's just another way of marketing that's not as traditional. But as many know right now, like community and really person-to-person interaction is really what's driving conversion and brand awareness. So influencer marketing is really something that brands are starting to lean towards and put budget behind because they're seeing the amazing results that come from it.
Awesome. So in this episode, we're going to talk about how to work with a scrappy budget. To start out, can you just kind of explain how some of the budgeting works and how pricing is figured out between a brand and a influencer?
Yeah. So number one, I'd say with budget, that's something that right off the bat, you as a brand should have defined before reaching out to an influencer. If you don't have that figured out, there's just going to be a lot of back and forth. And one thing that influencers I found want to do is grow with the brand. So they're open to negotiation, and as a brand, you should be open to it as well because influencers do bring a lot of value in more ways than one. From a paid perspective, I think it really varies. I typically say, like looking at the last five, the average of the last 5 post impressions is something to go off of in terms of what you're likely to see from an engagement point and also be able to calculate from like how expensive it is. There's a whole formula that I'm happy to share if you DM me on LinkedIn. But I think it's really kind of relative to a whole number of things. Mainly engagement. Follower accounts really not as big of a thing anymore. It's really how an influencer engages and how high their engagement rate is. You're wanting to really focus on influencers that have at least like a 3% engagement rate on their channels. And that varies from channel to channel as to what you're looking for. TikTok's a bit more. But yeah, sorry, I babbled a little bit there, but
no, it's okay.
A lot of things that determine cost and budget.
Yeah, so engagement rate, is that the amount of likes and comments they get compared to their followers? Like what is the engagement?
It's it's not compared to their followers, I guess. And again, I'm more in the influencer marketing and social media, but like for engagement, like are they interacting with their followers? Not only are their followers interacting with their content, but is the influencer engaging with them? And that's what you want to see because, like, for example, you're not going to like buy from an influencer just because they said something. Like you're more likely, yes, you may trust them and buy from them, but you're more likely to buy and believe in a product if that influencer is engaging with you as a follower and like encouraging you to buy but also building the relationship with you. You feel like that's a friend who's recommending something.
Yeah, that's what I feel like my fear would be is someone just going to post and ghost like, here's $5,000. They post the thing, be like, and then that's it. They just disappear. They don't
Well,
comment or engage.
yeah, and that can happen. I think you can put a lot of that stuff in a contract, but you should look into that before you partner with an influencer and see how they engage with their community, because they're likely to do the same with the paid. And that's also why, yeah, like with a post, and I like that post and ghost, that you want to make sure like you have potential plans either in the works or, considered for continuing the partnership with an influencer, because posting one time, you can see like the initial results from that post, but you're not going to see the full potential unless you continue to partner with that influencer in some capacity.
So, when working with a scrappy budget, how do you even determine what a reasonable budget is for yourself?
I think you have to determine first off what you're trying to do with the influencer content, and influencer marketing, whether that be just for content purposes, um, what kind of influencers you're trying to reach, and if you're focusing more on brand awareness versus conversion. So there's a lot that goes into play there. I don't think you can really say like, this is what you need to pay. And I've seen a lot of people on LinkedIn and other communities I'm part of kind of say like, yeah, there really isn't a budget. I would say you want per campaign. I think it's nice to have around 5K, which campaign, I mean like, you know, uh, Thanksgiving or something where it's, something that's already a focal point of the marketing calendar for the brand, and where influencer marketing can be built into that campaign. So put in email, put in social, really utilized in different ways, and tested. So, but there's also ways to not have a budget, if depending on your product and depending on what results you're wanting to get out of influencers. But the whole exchange and like product in exchange for content is just becoming a lot less common. And there's just like a lot that's not built into that, like repurposing it, usage rights, like I mentioned. It's kind of just more like, sure, I'll post, but there's kind of nothing else built into that. And from a pay perspective, there's a lot more kind of logistically that you can get out of it through a contract, for the brand, and from a
Hmm.
tracking perspective and all that.
Yeah, I was going to say too, it's probably wise too to really, like we talked about in our first episode, do your homework and try to find an influencer who actually is going to like and love your product, so that it's
Mhm.
actually someone who's going out there and genuinely sharing about it versus this person has a lot of engagement. Let's hire them. Or this one has smaller engagement, but they would definitely be passionate about this product. And I think their audience would be more engaged to have an engaged influencer versus someone who's just making some money on a post.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you just said this, the thing about like finding influencers who are already talking about your products. Great. I mean, I work with a lot of brands who just don't really have a big customer base right now. So that's harder to find. And it's more starting relationships with influencers from scratch and sending them the product. But I think being patient and nurturing relationships is really a key thing, because like it's not just a business transaction, and like influencers know when you're just trying to utilize them for their audience. And like the you'll find the influencers who really believe in the product if you're really genuine and strategic in your outreach.
So if you're looking for, I mean, we're talking about scrappy budgets. If you're looking for smaller influencers who might be on the more affordable side, what is a good strategy to hunt them down and start engaging and getting to know them, like across different platforms? I guess, is it hashtag searching or?
Well, to find them, or to, I guess,
I guess so.
to
Yeah,
find
like
them.
say identify them. Yeah, like let's
Oh,
find
okay.
five
So
people
I
we want to kind of study before we reach out.
So yeah, I do well, I actually don't really use hashtags. I just search in TikTok, because I mean TikTok's like the new Google search engine is what they're saying. So I search by like key things like dry skin, like who's posting about dry skin and how this beauty product helped them. I also look under like brands who are similar to me, or maybe like I'm helping a beauty brand right now, and they're focused in it's an under eye cream, and they are actually focusing on like hydration, and so we've been focusing on like pilots and flight attendants because they're up in the air and it's dry, and or skiers. Like there's things that are out of the box. So that can help when you manually search, because your For You page kind of gets created for yourself, and then you can just kind of scroll. I also have a lot of connections in the space when it comes to uh, talent managers with women in influencer marketing. We have a Slack channel, and there's like a casting channel. So I can put out like, hey, I'm looking for these people with this engagement rate, this age. You can even like say like, I want to see that they're high converters. So I think there's a lot of different ways that people build out their program. I don't think you just want to rely on your own search. I think putting yourself in a few different buckets is really important to get your a good pool of influencers to work with for a campaign.
Is it even possible for a brand to figure it out on their own, or should they start with someone like you, like a freelancer or a smaller business that kind of focuses on connecting influencers and brands?
I think they can do it on their own, but I think a lot of like I've worked with brands who like they start the process and they don't really have anyone to finish it and build it. And I think that's the issue is people are like, oh, I want to get into influencer marketing or, send to influencers, but like they don't understand the relationship building aspect of it. And that was something that like I feel like I have to teach a lot. So even if you have someone as a consultant, which myself and a lot of other people in this space do, I think that's really helpful to just have someone to talk to in terms of strategy and what makes sense. Because I think there's a lot of misconceptions in this space and a lot of education that has to happen to really make sure you're building out a program that can actually have success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you got to make sure it's going to work, and paying for a consult is way better before you spend your 5,000 or whatever it's going to be on a campaign to make sure that you didn't miss anything.
Yeah, and I think like having a team that you can really like work through, like, I think understanding like influencer marketing works alongside the social team to help, we're all kind of working together, and then they work with the paid team to help with ads. So I think having someone, I mean, ideally someone on the team is amazing, but outsourcing I think is great if you can afford like an expert in the space to really help when it comes to the process.
That kind of made me think of another question. Since all this is, I mean, all the influencing is social media based, should you do like a health check on your own brand's social media platforms before you start linking up with influencers to make sure, if you don't want like a dead account all of a sudden getting shared and posted with other people? Is there like a period where you want to kind of groom or bring some life back into an inactive social media account for your brand?
I think it depends. I mean, I see a lot of brands who just go silent for a while and then start to build out their influencer first, and they're using that influencer content to actually fuel their social strategy. So, I like for uh, brands like United Sodas and like some of the companies I'm helping now, a lot of the content's coming from UGC and influencers, and and that's what's really helped our engagement grow. Before that, it was kind of like basic pictures and just product only shots. So I think uh, it's good to have engagement and grow, but I think too, like the influencers are going to help you continue that. I think if you're not building out if you don't have a, curated feed, and you're not whatever, like you're not posting consistently, at least being like a fly on the wall in other people's content proves really great. So one thing I do, which I haven't mentioned yet, is I help with social community engagement. So for those brands who don't have a lot of brand awareness or are trying to build that community, I am that person who's like commenting on the comments that people make in our posts. I'm also going on influencer posts of influencers we like that may not be posting our product, but we want to like say, hey. So just being like a name out there can prove really successful if you're still figuring out what to post on your social. But I think it's not the end all be all. I think it's so highly competitive, and I think it's kind of turning more towards community than content, as being like the big driver for brands.
Mm-hmm. So, do you have any tips for people who have a smaller budget? What's like the wisest way to get started? I know we talked about there's so many different ways to utilize an influencer, different effects they can have, and different styles of campaigns. What's the most cost effective type of campaign you can run with an influencer?
Well, I mean, number one would be seating because that's just product only, but there's no guarantee of posting. It requires to get a high posting rate, which by posting, I really mean stories. You really have to follow up with the influencer, engage with them, check in that if they haven't posted and if since they've gotten the product, like check in with them. You can't be like, hey, just checking in when you're going to post. Like that's not on them to do that. And not agreed upon, but it's definitely a little bit more hand holding of a process when it comes to seating, but less budget. I also think building UGC into your influencer marketing budget, I think is helpful. It's obviously not exactly the same as influencer, but it can be utilizing influencers and creators to create content for your brand. So it's not as expensive. It ranges typically from honestly anywhere from $50 to $5,000 per piece of content. It's really dependent on the creator and usage rights, but it's a way to build credibility in the space through your own channels by having content that's really personable and a little bit more like has more of an influencer style to it than traditional marketing would. And then I think in terms of like other also with scrappiness, starting with seating, I think is always important because they get the product in their hands. They get to experience it firsthand, see if they like the product. And if you see that an influencer posts organically, that's kind of a checkpoint for you to say, okay, let's go ahead and continue to talk to them and see what else we can do with them. So as a brand, that's what I look out for from influencers is like, are they posting organically? Just a quick shot. It doesn't have to be like a video, but something saying like, oh, I just got this. I'm really excited. That's just like my go ahead to say, okay, like they are interested. And a green light. If I don't see any interaction from an influencer, I kind of move on. It's a two-way street. So I think it's like, if they're not engaging with you, then it's probably not going to be a fruitful paid partnership if they can't take the time to kind of build that relationship. So yeah, I'd say like seeding is the best way to start and seeding UGC is the best way to start and go from there.
And can you give me just an example of what user generated content can look like?
So, I mean, that's kind of, well, so you can look
So I have
at,
no idea. It's like, are you talking about you send someone some mascara and then they might just put a picture of it on a table, or is it them like actually making a video of trying it out? Like,
it's a high quality thing. So like user generated content can be through a customer where they're just like posting on their own because they're excited, they're a customer and a fan. And that could typically tends to be a little bit lower quality because they're not influencers or creators in their own right. But they're a brand fan. And so that type of content, you really have to go through your social or email and ask them for rights to repurpose. That's always really important. if you're a brand, to ask that right to repurpose, because legally that just can get you into a lot of trouble. Same with influencer stuff. Don't repost unless you ask them, because that can just cause a whirlwind of issues. Reposting on stories is fine, not on static. But with UGC content creators, they're like, I send them I create a brief. I send them examples of content we like from their feed, as well as other brand examples. I send them brand facts. I talk to them how long I want the video to be. Other than that, I kind of let them run with it. I don't give them like a script to talk off of, unless it's like very addy, but I don't really like to go that direction with brands. I don't find it as great from a conversion perspective. But yeah, so there needs to be someone behind it, like kind of finding the creators, negotiating pay, sending them a brief, accepting the content. And that typically takes like minimum 2 weeks. I'd say it's more like 4 to 8 weeks to really make that content come to light from beginning to end.
Yeah, that raises an interesting question. What is like the timeline from reaching out to an influencer to actually getting something put up?
It depends on what you're asking of them, but I would say, and it depends on your shipping timeline, which I think is something to really consider. Like, do you have product in stock to send to them and for their customers to buy? There's a lot involved there, but I think it could be anywhere from a week to 3 months. It just depends on the scope of the project, and also what kind of, how hands-on you as a brand want to be in terms of edits and approval and that type of thing. Because, depending how big your team is, it might have to go through many loopholes. So I think I'd say on average, it's probably like 4 to 6 weeks. 1 week's pretty fast, unless it's just like a story.
Okay. Any final thoughts on influencer marketing with a scrappy budget?
I would just say, and I said this a little bit earlier, make sure when you are reaching out to influencers to really let them know that you're wanting to work with them and grow the relationship on a long-term perspective, which I would assume is your goal. But I think that's really important because influencers, just like with any brand, they want to nurture a relationship. And so knowing that the brand's really looking to help them build their brand as well, I think will prove really helpful if you have a limited budget, and maybe help with the negotiation factor in terms of kind of what they're working with on their typical budget and what you have available.
Perfect. And that's a great segue into our next episode, which is building influencer relationships in real life, which is critical for all aspects of business. So, Lauren, thanks again, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks.
Stories from the Top is your guide to successful business development. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or find Edge of Cinema on YouTube. Stories from the Top is an Edge of Cinema production, hosted by Matthew Skura and Jeremy Schmidt. To learn more or get in touch, visit edgeofcinema.com/podcast.